What problem does AI solve? For this presentation, I will consider the question of what problem AI attempts to solve for music and music production from four positions. Number one, David Cope's relationship to his AI and whether similar benefits are possible within a generalizable AI system. The second is to look at AI as gender ventriloquism and ethnoforgery as examples of a form of musical valuing, a system of musical values. For the third aspect, I turn to the idea of the ongoing need for humans to work in an AI system rather than being made redundant and no longer necessary. The final perspective considers issues beyond those of licensing, which tend to be the concern of record labels. Please keep in mind the following. Langdon Winner states very clearly that within each technology is contained, and I quote, a concealed unintention, which is just as much a part of our calculations as the immediate end in view. While Winner's objective statement summarizes the issue well, we must also ask a number of other questions. These include whose intention, why conceal, who made the calculations, and what is this immediate end view? AI researcher Ruha Benjamin, I believe, flips Winner's perspective and says that we are all living within other people's imaginations, which are generally the underside of elite fantasies about efficiency, profit, and social control. Composer David Cope turned to AI to overcome a creative block while working on an opera. He created and developed his own machine, and once it was operational, this led to the rapid completion of the opera. During this process, it was revealed to Cope that what he considered his compositional style might not have been as distinctive as he first thought, thus highlighting the potential for AI to challenge our perceptions of our personal creativity, our abilities, and our sense of what style might actually mean. Rather than AI replacing or even mimicking, in this version, it could assist in ways that go beyond the immediate parameters of an automatic composition generator, what I like to call an ACG, or even as a tool. It becomes something else. Cope's realization reflects a broader difference between older, highly supervised models and today's generative AI and large language models. These rely on vast amounts of data to be ingested to identify patterns for content creation. In fact, researcher Joshua Bach says that in some ways we could reformulate AI. Instead of saying artificial intelligence, we could actually say artificial information processing. And he feels that this would be a far more accurate representation of AI because it's not really that intelligent. So these newer large language models require less of a hands-on guidance. Therefore, this raises questions about their capacity to offer similar personal insights into creativity and style as experienced by Cope. Selma Brinksjord emphasizes that large language models offer convenience to programmers by bypassing the need for them, the programmers, to explicitly define problems, thereby lifting the, and I quote, the burden of having to express a problem. Bender and colleagues highlight that this is what is largely responsible for the improvements in large language models, that is, the development of computer architecture and so on, rather than actually any advances in terms of computer science regarding the advances in terms of what is intelligence. This shifting of the burden of the large language model, the burden of responsibility, is a move away from understanding creativity in computational terms. Instead of defining algorithms that lead to creative outputs, the onus is actually placed on the user to evaluate the AI's outputs and to determine whether they are appropriate or not. This leads in general, and certainly in terms of music production particularly, this means that music creators begin to adopt what is known as a generate then curate approach. Thus, this disrupts the notion of a music practice in terms of a flow. Flow is no longer within the system of AI because the AI generates something and humans have to stop whatever they're doing to evaluate it. Lucy Suchman refers to AI as a floating signifier, meaning that AI can mean lots of things to different people at all times. In an earlier time, an expression was identified by Philip Agre, and I'm going to quote here, who referred to the dual character of AI terminology, the vernacular and formal faces that each technical term presents. This duality is expressed as a strongly scientific basis combined with an abstract or loose understanding of how the output is generated. Thus, terms like magic and hallucination become the vernacular expressions used by scientists and enthusiasts in public-facing encounters to describe the AI's output. AI, regardless of the situations in which it is used, raises ethical and business issues. This can be matters of ownership and creativity, as well as those of direct and indirect modelling. This is especially so where statistical methods are used to derive feature sets that are deemed to be salient. I will illustrate this point using two virtual AI artists, FN Meka and Nonori. FN Meka was signed to Capitol Records but dropped a few days later due to concerns of bias and stereotyping. FN Meka's makers and Capitol Records faced strong criticism for perpetuating stereotypes. In this form, blackness is tracked as a useful property. This results in what I refer to as a form of ethnoforgery, and it is ethnoforgery because many of the participants using virtual artists, either as the basis for financial ventures or as end users, are majority white. Nonori is a virtual AI artist and digital character currently signed to Warner Music Central Europe. Nonori is presented as an eternal 19-year-old female fashionista from Munich. However, the team behind the character is all male. Nonori's singing voice and speaking voice are those of George Zuber, the developer, who pitched his voice up to sound more feminine. Zuber also used himself to model how the character walks. This approach, which is something that Strong and Rain suggest, demonstrates that women's voices have often been filtered through the male ear, or in some cases, women's performances have been controlled and dominated by the men in control of the processes of recording. Helen Reddington highlights that ventriloquism in voice technologies might appear to be playful for men, as in Zuber's case, but actually disempowering for women. Whilst there is a long history of impersonation in entertainment, such as female Elvis impersonators, Zuber's desire to place himself at the centre of activities, but rendered as a digital character, makes his impersonation and the guiding force and motivations behind his various feminine and activist-inflected messages opaque. So FN Meka and Nonori, as well as other digital characters, embody what Peterson Saludin refers to as a corporeal other, where matters of ethnicity and gender are the result of a form of technological seeing. This includes things like cultural specificities, such as black people, that are entangled with technology to enhance the underlying design of a widely used technology. These examples highlight the challenges in creating digital representations of minority ethnic artists and their cultures without perpetuating harmful stereotypes and turning them into things. In this way, we see the product of ethnoforgery in the service of generally white-owned technology businesses backed by large amounts of white capital via hedge funds and angel investors. Therefore, similar to the financialization of songwriting, primarily where money is made available for successful, generally white songwriters, we see the darker side of financialization where black voices are used without remuneration or compensation. Permission is not given and consent is not sought. In 1979, Douglas Hofstadter claimed that, and I quote, "There is no way a music program will write anything beautiful." Yet his encounter with Cope's Emmy in 1997, this is Cope's own AI, forced a re-evaluation. He said, and again I quote, "Emmy doesn't generate style on its own. It depends on mimicking prior composers. But that is still not all that much comfort. To what extent is music composed of riffs, as jazz people say? If that's mostly the case, then it would mean that, to my absolute devastation, music is much less than I ever thought it was." Hofstadter's realization has some merit, but also overlooks two crucial points. The first is that humans learn, in part, from the interpretation of others' work. It's the closest we get to passing on a skill or serving a sort of apprenticeship. When we consider ideas like partimento or jazz's rhythm changes or stories about the young J.S. Bach adapting Corelli sonatas, in all of these we can acknowledge the use of a prior music leveraged as a learning tool to develop skills which, hopefully over time, will result in new music that is also distinct rather than a repetition of more of the same. For AI, the question becomes, what is new music? Over the last few years, we have seen the introduction of automatic composition generators, which can produce music that, at least for most users, resembles that of a human. However, despite AI companies' claims that AI will destroy or render artistic skill superfluous, Zhang highlights that machines will continue to need humans because, and I quote, "Future humans need to constantly provide new knowledge, ultimately serving three aspects. Number one, increase computing power. Number two, improve algorithms. And number three, provide feedback to machines." Currently, most issues with AI and music concern those of licensing. Some refer to this as the 3 Cs: consent, credit, and compensation. Patrick Vikstrom's position is that the music industry is in fact a copyright industry. In this sense, Vikstrom's definition of industry generally refers to recording and publishing. It is a fact that since the advent of the online, of the internet, there has been a general move towards consolidating catalogues and licensing them through as many technologies as possible. Not just AI, but also film and games and TV, adverts, online activities, like covers through YouTube and TikTok videos. Recent researchers, like Tang, in 2024, suggest that IP policy, intellectual property policy, should be viewed more as a labour policy, thereby removing the assumption that revenue will trickle down to creators when artists' intellectual property is held by large companies. However, we can also consider AI in a way that does not require licensing, but that assists in very difficult cultural tasks. The main issue that music makers experience is getting their music in front of listeners and building an audience. Most of these activities tend to take place away from music listening platforms like Spotify and take place much more on social media platforms like TikTok. So we could ask the question of whether an AI could be developed to take on this very difficult and highly particularized activity of fan building. Currently, it seems that AI is unable to do this. While many commentators repeat the mantra that production and distribution costs are zero, an associated expense, both of time and money, is tied to promoting the music and the artist. As an example of how difficult this task is, the AI company Boomy recently signed a distribution and marketing deal with Warner Music Group's independent label services arm, Ada. The deal will market several Boomy curated AI artists to audiences via streaming services and platforms in much the same way as non-AI artists. when one tries to understand the difficulty of this kind of cultural kind of seeding and trying to promote work. A good example as a cultural phenomenon is Lil Nas X's Old Town Road, which is considered, at least by Stanfill and many others, is considered as an example of a hit genre-defying song, which also exhibits a total disregard of categories as successive remixes combined widely disparate artists and genres to produce something that defied expectations. In general, music AI companies and developers need to address this defying of expectation, especially as a creative act, precisely because popular music, in its broadest sense, also challenges convention from multiple perspectives. Therefore, AI's capability to challenge convention or assist artistic resistance remains, at least from my perspective, remains largely untested. The essential claim of generative AI companies in music is that they will make their users more creative, efficient, and productive. Yet, as Morial highlights, and I quote again, this is an unchallenged axiomatic assumption that AI will help musicians make music. If we consider things like the interface, not just as a form of input or direction, but also as a means of control, then what we have are really computer tools that are more an expression of the developers' and scientists' values in deciding what creativity, efficiency, and productivity should be. David Cope referred to his AI as something to provoke me into composing. This is not just the idea of an AI solving a creative block, but one that perhaps operates at a different, perhaps even collaborative level, even if limited. This level might be more about making observations and deriving insights from the material, which may well also involve both human and machine observations that require an interface that is more than a set of sliders and buttons. It is at points like this where I think of Laurie Anderson's statement that dangerous art can be made with a pencil. Anderson's analogy is apt because it is a means of combating the tendency for AI whereby all musical works are essentially the same. If we consider AI as capable of making art, then we must also accept that AI can only be one of many modes of art making, from the pencil or the crayon onwards. This runs counter to the desire of AI companies to dominate the world of music production required by the hedge fund and VC funders who also then require their profit. Therefore, whether we make our work using computer software, using AI, playing instruments, or a mixture of all, the purpose is still to make work that moves and that has meaning. The output, therefore, is only the beginning of the story.